Hey guys, welcome to another video. It's Dr. Mike Hansen here. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I specialize in internal medicine, pulmonary disease, and critical care medicine. And really, my focus is on metabolic health. So lifestyle medicine and preventative medicine, which focuses on nutrition and preventing diseases in the first place. So there's something called chronic non-communicable diseases, meaning these are diseases that stem from what we eat in our lifestyle. And if it's not something that's a purely genetic condition or purely an infectious disease causing illness, it's going to fall into the bucket of chronic non-communicable disease. This would be things like obesity, like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver disease, even things like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia like vascular dementia, and of course heart disease, whether that's heart attacks, stroke, high blood pressure. So all of these things really fall into that bucket of chronic non-communicable disease. Now, I recently saw some TikTok videos that were alluding to a recent obesity special done on 60 Minutes. And some of the things that I saw on those TikTok videos were accurate and some of those were not accurate. So I figured I'd make a video on this and go through that video with you guys. So let's go ahead and get started on that.
Now,
Okay, a couple things already. The first thing that she said that many people believe, and when you have someone like this who's saying this on national television, that these chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and so forth are caused by obesity. No, actually, it's the other way around. It's insulin resistance is actually what causes all these metabolic abnormalities. Now, this applies to obesity as well. At least 90 to 95% of people who are obese have some degree of underlying metabolic abnormality, some kind of metabolic derangement, whether that's a small degree of insulin resistance that's driving that. But there are about 5 to 10% of people who are obese who are metabolically healthy. In fact, these people are labeled as metabolically healthy obesity, MHO. So that's because these people have hyperinsulin secretion. So their pancreas is actually making more insulin than it should be. But again, that's a very small percentage of the overall people who have obesity. Most people who have obesity have some degree of insulin resistance. You could think of it as a spectrum. There's insulin resistance, and then eventually when it gets worse and worse, it develops type 2 diabetes. It develops into pre-diabetes, and then after pre-diabetes, it's type 2 diabetes. So we can think of this as a spectrum of the same issue, and that comes down to insulin resistance. Oh, one more thing on that. So it's not just type 2 diabetes that's affected by insulin resistance. The same goes for hypertension. There's different types of hypertension, but 90% of hypertension is what's called essential hypertension or benign hypertension, and that's what we're talking about here. So insulin resistance, too much for too long of a period of time, will eventually drive the blood pressure to go higher and higher. Other things that stem from insulin resistance would include heart disease, stroke, even certain forms of dementia like Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, fatty liver disease. It's all part of the same spectrum. It's all boils down to insulin resistance, which really boils down to the food that you're eating. So to the other thing that she was saying about scientists can't agree on what's caused the dramatic increase, it's been pretty obvious what's been going on over the years. When you look back at the time of human existence, our genes haven't changed since the first humans have been on Earth. Our gene pool is basically the same. What has changed and correlates with the levels of rise of obesity, especially over the last 40 to 50 years, is our environment. Our processed food is a big part of it. And people say, oh, well, diet and exercise, I've done diet and exercise and I can't lose weight. And I'll get to that, so let's not get ahead of ourselves on that one. But my point being is that what we've eaten in our environment and the chemicals that we've been exposed to over the past 40 to 50 years actually affects not our genes, but our epigenetics. And so our epigenetics actually is what dictates what our genes express, what our genes say, which genes are turned off and turned on, like a light switch. But also, if you think of our genes, it's not just a light switch, but they also have a dimmer switch. So our epigenetics influences that dimmer switch of which genes are being expressed. And so there's different what we call obesogen molecules as well as endocrine disrupting molecules in our environment. Many of those molecules are in our food, and they can actually impact generations to come. So there's something called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, and it goes back as far as 3 to 4 generations. So in other words, what your great grandparents ate, what your grandparents ate, what your parents ate, including what you had when you were a fetus. All of these things are actually impacted our germ cells. So our germ cells are impacted, and it's through the epigenetic mechanism of these chemicals or an environment. So yeah, sugar, fructose of what your great grandparents ate can actually affect your risk of developing obesity. Of course, obesity is a disease. It's a chronic, systemic, metabolic, and endocrinological disease. Okay, this doctor's saying it's a brain disease, and it does involve the brain, but I think it's an oversimplification to say it's a brain disease. The reality is that obesity is a chronic, systemic, endocrinological, metabolic disease that affects all of our organs. Disagree with somewhat on what she's saying because right off the bat, she's already attributing it to a decrease in calories. So she's saying cut your calories down to 500, and they go on these fad diets for 2 months and they lose the weight and then they regain it. But a big issue with what she's saying is that it's not about the quantity of the calories, it's about the quality of the calories. This is why I don't advocate for calorie counting, because it's not about the amount of calories that you're eating. You're not going to overeat too many calories from vegetables. When you're eating whole foods, when you're eating real food, naturally it's going to contain lots of soluble and insoluble fiber. You should be eating 25 to 30 grams at minimum of that, and no more than 25 grams of added sugar. Of course, processed food, it's full of added sugar and refined carbohydrates and devoid of insoluble and soluble fiber. The people who have the most success with diets are the ones who don't look at it as a diet. It's really a lifestyle. That's why the Mediterranean diet ends up doing so well as consistently being the #1 ranked diet. Also, intermittent fasting, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. So, for example, when you're looking at people who live the longest, happiest, healthiest lives, the blue zones of the world, they're eating mostly unprocessed food. A big reason why people fail these diets, again, is because they're on these fad diets. They can't sustain it beyond 2 months at a time. And again, it's not about cutting the calories down. Your body doesn't do well over the long term with that approach. It's about eating as much healthy food as you need to eat to feel full. And that's why it's so important to eat unprocessed food, because when you're doing that, you're naturally getting a bunch of soluble and insoluble fiber, which helps to keep you feeling full and not eating as much when you're eating those types of foods. So things like whole, intact grains, legumes like beans, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and so forth. So that's only part of the equation. The other part is, even if you were to eat completely unprocessed food and you were to do exercise, some people, and this is where she's right, some people still are not able to lose significant amounts of weight for a sustained period amount of time. And for these people, when they're not able to have success by doing diet and exercise alone, they need something else, if there's something else available. And there really hasn't been anything available that actually works and is safe up until recently with these new GLP receptor agonist medications, which we'll get to in a little bit. Oh, and why do I say this is the case now? Well, because 50 years ago, more and more people were able to do it through diet and exercise if they were eating unprocessed food and so forth. But now, because of all this transgenerational epigenetic inheritance from all these obesogens and endocrine disrupting molecules that we've been exposed to in our environment and our previous generations have been exposed to, and now we're suffering the consequences as a result of that. Absolutely. Now people are obese and they can't overcome it with just changing or what they're eating and through exercise alone, no matter how hard they try. So the willpower, throw it out the window, and they need something else to help them get them over this edge.
So when people see
Okay, so this is where she's wrong when she says genetics. Again, our genes haven't changed for the most part over the last, since the first human stepped on Earth. What has changed is our epigenetics. So she's right when she's saying 50 to 85% based on what your parents are. Yes, you will have obesity if your parents are obese, 50 to 85%, but it's because of epigenetics. And epigenetics is because of what's been in our environment over the last few generations. That's what's changed. Okay, I'm a doctor. I'd like to respond to that. So she is right for the most part that most doctors don't understand nutrition because we're taught very little of it in med school. But also, there's actually a lot of misinformation, and a lot of so-called experts in nutrition actually get it wrong, whether it's nutritionists or dietitians. There's a lot. It's very much a gray area, and there's a lot of misinformation that has a lot of information that's been inaccurate over the years. For example, rewind 20, 30 years ago, it was all about the keep the carbs high and the fat low. And we know that it's inaccurate now. So I think there's something to be said for people not truly understanding what is a healthy diet. Can anyone define what is a healthy diet? And there's still a big myth that people think it's all about the calories. It's not about the quantity of calories. It's about the quality of calories. So until people truly understand that it's all about unprocessed food that you have to be focusing on, people aren't going to really understand the nutrition of it. So a lot of it does have to do with the fact that you have to understand truly what a healthy diet is, because so many of us get it wrong, especially because 75% of the food in our grocery store is highly processed food or ultra processed food. And when you're eating processed food, that's the main driver of metabolic illness. We don't like to admit it. Some of us don't want to eat it. It's cheaper. We don't have time to cook it, maybe. There's 4 or 5 really good reasons why people don't eat mostly unprocessed food, but that's a fact that's not going to change.
That
Right there just goes to show the advice that she was told was to focus on the portion size, which that's not where the focus should lie. The focus should lie on the type of food that you're eating. So what she's talking about is tirzepatide, which is also known as Mounjaro. That's the newest one that came out that has shown to be the most effective, where it's actually up to 21% of the patient's baseline body weight at 72 weeks of being on this medication. Now, in this trial, the SURPASS-1 trial, and published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, both groups in the study did exercise and ate a healthy diet. They didn't specify what the healthy diet was, but we just are told that it was a healthy diet. Both groups were exercising and on a healthy diet, and then the treatment group consisted of tirzepatide, and within that treatment group of tirzepatide, they broke it down into the different doses of tirzepatide. And of course, the higher the dose, the one that was the highest one was 15 milligrams, the more the weight loss. And in the highest dose group, they lost on average up to 21% of their body weight at the 72-week mark. Yeah, so this is true. So two things. One is the insurance aspect of it, which is really sad because so many people can benefit from these drugs and should be on these drugs, quite frankly. But also too, this is something I came up with earlier. You can take a look. These are the types of drugs. So GLP-1 receptor agonists. This would include things like Mounjaro, semaglutide, which is also known as Wegovy, Ozempic. Okay. So look at all these benefits that come from these drugs. This has been shown in the studies, and I can pull it up in a little bit, but all the benefits that come from there. So we have improve or reverse type 2 diabetes, the weight loss, which is obvious here, reduce cravings, which contributes towards the weight loss, indirectly improving mental health, indirectly preventing cancer, indirectly decreasing the risk for heart attack and stroke, improving cholesterol, improving or decreasing inflammation. We see that in the studies. Indirectly preventing or mitigating dementia. Improving brain function, mood, memory, and focus indirectly because you're improving the metabolic health. So if you have this huge population of people, whether it's obesity or overweight, 2/3 of the adult population in the US is either overweight or obese, with how many people who are metabolically unhealthy? It's estimated that 88% of the US adult population has some degree of metabolic illness, whether that's in the form of high triglycerides, high blood pressure, this is part of metabolic syndrome, or some degree of insulin resistance, which is also part of metabolic syndrome. Here you have so many people who could be benefiting from these medications. And how many of these people have already tried diet and exercise and still aren't getting the results that they need to improve their metabolic health? So to me, it's only a matter of time before these drugs are not just approved for type 2 diabetes and obesity, but these are going to be approved for a whole lot of different indications, including metabolic syndrome. Because really, like I said at the beginning, all of these chronic metabolic disorders stem from the same issue, which is insulin resistance. Yes, she's absolutely right. Well, disagree with a little bit on some of that because I would tell them lifestyle first and foremost. But if lifestyle is not getting you there, then absolutely get these medications to help you get there. So yeah, whether it's type 2 diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver disease, it's all stemming from the same problem. Of course, yes, quit sugar, eat unprocessed food, exercise. But if that's not getting you there, yes, take these medications because they work. it's a shame that there's so much shame put on people who are overweight or obese. When someone comes to the ER with an asthma attack, they're short of breath, we don't shame them for feeling short of breath or coming to the ER because of their medical problem. It should be the opposite. We should say, you know what, glad you came in to seek help for this. Instead, it's the real world that's been the opposite, which that is a shame. Yeah, so these are life-changing medications. One thing I forgot to mention, there's actually other things that get better with these medications that I left off because the list is pretty much endless. But I've seen a lot of TikTok videos where people have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and they say that not only did they lose a lot of weight, but their PCOS was much improved, if not even basically weren't having any issues with it. So that's just another thing. I've seen other videos where people are saying that they felt less anxious in general because they weren't so worried about food. Even their cravings for alcohol were improved. So these are truly life-changing medications. And I will be making more videos about these medications, going into more details, including a common question that's being asked is what happens when you stop these medications? So there's very limited studies on this, but one of the studies does show that people gain maybe not necessarily all of the weight back, but a lot of the weight back. There are no real long-term studies on these medications, so there are some questions. But from what we can tell so far, they're very safe, they're very effective, and it seems like people will have to remain on them if they do require them. Not necessarily all people, but probably most people. Again, we just don't know too much long-term right now. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this actually helped you answer some questions about obesity and about these new medications for obesity and type 2 diabetes and so much more. So if you haven't already, feel free to go ahead and subscribe to this channel, help this channel grow out, and I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.